Olivia Baldwin's practice interweaves painting and sculpture. Her work has been exhibited in venues in Austria, Italy, and throughout the United States, including AIR Gallery and Jane Lombard Gallery in New York City, and Boston University's Fay G. Joe and James Gallery. She has attended residencies at the Woodstock Birdcliff Guild and Vermont Studio Center, and is a 2019 recipient of a Mass MoCA Assets for Artists grant. She earned her BFA in painting and BA in English Creative Writing from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and is a candidate for the MFA in Studio Art at the University of Connecticut. Please welcome Olivia Baldwin.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you all for being here today. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my committee and my cohort. Thank you, Shadia, Chad, and Liz. Blistered apricot, ashen gray, amethyst crinkle, moss seafoam, puce. These are the colors of rot. They surface through ripening and decomposition, are propelled by acidity and temperature. When combined, the barriers between materials dissolve. One asserts itself over another. A certain smell or color carries. Together, they mix and decompose, become fertile. My work begins with color. It precedes structure, guides what follows, holds opposites and disparates together. It is relational and vast, saccharine and sacred, putrid and fierce. I think about hold in color, about a form's capacity to support a particular color, whether it can bear the weight or whether it requires structural support or the counterweight of another color. In this sense, I treat color not as perceptual stimuli, but as material, as object. In her essay on color, Amy Silman writes, "This way of working with color, anthropomorphic, relational, emotional, psychological, and corporeal, has nothing to do with color theory, only the theory of ignoring a theory. In other words, let us welcome the collision of mistakes, accidents, desires, contradictions, destruction, and possible disasters that color embodies." An expanse of pink somewhere between damask rose, salmon, and Barbie, catapult stretches 11 feet and 5 inches towards ceiling. It surfaced during a snowy winter at Vermont Studio Center. Pink pools, bleeds, and crystallizes, recording salt tracks from my clogs and my dog's paws. It began as one of several paintings intended as parts of a larger installation. Catapult dried partly on floor, partly swooping onto wall, leaving its pink outline on the studio floor as I continued building other large parts to eventually collide in an installation. But as I built parts, the continuation of this work felt forced and predictable. I pinned Catapult to the wall. It demanded no answer, no counterpoint, at least within itself. The form is specific but unfamiliar, vaguely figurative. It holds the teeter of a seesaw and a bridge, the back of a dinosaur, the head of a Pac-Man. It is a body asleep on its side, holding and wanting to be held. It holds us, and the room, in turn, holds it. Catapult's evolution was direct and unfussy. I walked on canvas, mixed a color, covered the canvas in paint, cut a shape, and tacked it to the wall. Ordinarily, I'm suspicious of work that arises linearly, in large part because discovery tends to occur when I don't expect it, often from failure. In some sense, Catapult is a failure. It could not perform the purpose for which it was built. It begged to be alone. And so, the work leaves me asking if a color and a shape are enough, if I've adequately given to it and labored on it to let it become, whether it's already here. My process concerns fermentation. The studio becomes the compost bucket. Here, scraps and fragments, both physical and conceptual, accumulate. Their roles are unfixed. Their colors, textures, and relative authority change through proximity. Make a thing, hate the thing, try to fix the thing, take it too far, try to recover it, take it way too far, try to recover it, make it safe. Run out of that perfect color. Cut it into pieces. Stare at scraps, group scraps. Search for the putty knife. Walk on it. Put it in the hallway. Change one color, knowing it is the right color. Realize all the others are wrong. Recognize you have found something. I began Hunk by asking how to give to a work no more than it demands. The wood arrived on my doorstep, an anonymous offering. It was gorgeous on its own, almost fossil-like in its density. 3 years later, I attended a talk by the painter-turned-ceramic artist Kathy Butterly. Her 4-inch glazed porcelain sculptures became monumental when projected on the wall. I was in awe that despite her meticulous process, her forms appeared so casual and her colors so animate, the lemon yellows and nefarious greens. Moved by Butterly's objects, I approached the hunk of wood. Hunk is a dense, freestanding, 4-inch thick slab of wood, crudely upholstered in raw canvas and vibrant color. Lines of tacks drift from its perimeter, defining and undermining its appointment. Groups of puckered staples accumulate around its edges. One face is covered, the other exposed, flapping open like the back of a hospital gown. Hunk emerged from fragments, its genesis propelled by a casual immediacy, a sense of becoming and unbecoming. In occasional work and 7 walks from the Office of Soft Architecture, Lisa Robertson writes, "The pigment and ornament we apply to a supporting structure stir our gesture into the surface. Application is a persuasive and pleasurable folding. The surface is comprised of bodily traces and fixations. Rubbing, flecking, scrubbing, weaving, stroking are tactile instrumentations in time. They address both substance and the future of bodies." Leaner 3 came about as an attempt to replicate an early pink form in a different color and a larger scale. I couldn't quite reproduce the earlier form, and instead arrived at a shape that felt like a croissant. While the floorboard peg leg effect began as an obvious makeshift solution for support, Leaner 3's leg, which extends from its rowdy blue side, is more discreet, mostly invisible from its yellow side. At first, I called the Leaners truss balls. I gave Leaner 3 a leg because I wanted it to stand, needed to give it a source of support and stability. But I was also thinking about relationships, how neither the foam nor the wood could stand on its own, how one part is not leaning upon the other, but rather they are leaning together against each other. The stability of the whole requires reciprocity. Like the vast majority of my work, Leaner 3 is abstract and ruled by color and gesture, but I can't get away from the human. I became a gatherer of parts. I cut up old paintings, accumulated discarded foam, furniture, paper, and wood, conducted material research, stored remnants. In pursuit of a different surface quality, I began covering the foam in plaster. Palm-sized, high-chroma masses, chunks and lumps suggest meteorites, icebergs, and deserts. Their palettes are exuberant and grotesque, their surfaces spongy, greasy, lumpy, smooth. Some honor the foam structure, a corner here, a plane there. Using blocks of color, I acknowledge these planes while inventing and delineating new ones. Other chunks and lumps are indexical, carrying impressions of the green polyester rug on which they dried, occasionally hosting fibers. They refer to time, the interval between dipping and setting, speak to process rather than source. While hunk takes fragments to produce a whole, chunks and lumps distill fragments into wholes. I'm keenly interested in how a single work or series can suggest varying degrees of completion, and the extent to which an object can move between singularity and collectivity. When grouped, the chunks punctuate one another, answer the other's questions, offer antitheses. When the studio could no longer accommodate the chunks, I stacked them in the closet. In this new space, they became an installation rather than a series of sculptural paintings. The installation suggests process, unpainted plaster elements stacked adjacent to foam. The stacks of completed chunks perform as paintings containing seemingly infinite compositions of wedges and abutments. In this new orientation, a reversal occurs. The chunks become raw material, a heap of potential energy, ready for the taking. In thinking about the chunks and lumps, I considered how I would locate them within a two-dimensional space. In pursuit of answers, I began making relief prints. The prints are reminiscent of maps, neither too earthly nor too legible. They are specific and placeless. The making of the prints exposed several new strategies: a limited, earthier palette, a return to drawing, negative space articulated through patches, and heightened structure, all of which bled into the paintings. In concluding his seminal essay, Painting Beside Itself, David Joslet writes, "Transitivity is a form of translation. When it enters into networks, the body of painting is submitting to infinite dislocations, fragmentations, and degradations. As Kippenberger suggested nearly 20 years ago, these framing conditions cannot be quarantined. Painting is beside itself." Vessel and the Thresholds are unstretched conglomerates, paintings composed of parts: canvas, fabric, burlap, and paper, remnants of old work. Their colors have lived a life, ripened and gone to rot, products of quinacridone violet, lemon yellow, and ultramarine blue. In making these works, I focused on coupling unlikely elements, juxtaposing colors that in Alber's method don't belong together, couldn't belong together. Raw canvas eclipses rich color, garnet red dries as umber, forcing a large passage to submit to its minute neighbor. Drawing re-entered the paintings here in the form of gestural patches of oil stick and cut edges activated by negative space. In Threshold 2, a strip is slung upon a larger part, dirtied violet supporting cakey lemon yellow. Hung from two large nails, the violet base puckers 2 inches off of the wall, stiff from layers of paint, dramatic shadows underscoring its strength. It carries the limp yellow strip. A figure emerges, an animal held in suspension, a hide. My own biography slips in, the near year in Austria spent farming cows, 22 cows grazing on pasture, the meadow, the wild cherries, the electric fence, the fresh bloody cowskin in the back of the trunk behind the dance set. The bottom of the backside of the strip, the raw side, is equivalent in scale to the perpendicular strip of raw canvas in the violet form. Therefore, the fledgling strip defines the negative space in its source of support, acts as print, as record. One is not defining or supporting the other, rather, they need each other. Hold is a small, patterned, hammock-like form protruding a few inches from the wall. Its bottom section rolls toward its center, creating a cradle. It is quiet and full of hand, executed on raw canvas, with notations in colored pencil, occasionally obscured by oils. It gathers and ripples from the wall. Its protagonist is a small, burnt sienna form punctuated by yolk yellow, both familiar and unidentifiable. The golden section of its right side extends to the dimensional pink pattern section, recalling a body in a blanket. It holds itself. I can make a mark on a material, and that mark can lead to the next one, and so on. I think of Simone Weil's writing, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." My marks are notations that record presence, others as well as my own. They are a means of giving my attention to another, directing it to an object. And so these objects become containers, markers of time and presence that do not refer to a single event or concept, but rather hold several impulses at once. Link provides a counterpoint to the thresholds. While it reads as a construction of fragments, it is self-contained. Heavily reduced by cutouts and meandering edges, it requires no antagonist. It disrupts and destabilizes itself. Negative space and sharp shadows challenge its softness, its Crayola quality colors and directional strokes. It curls in response to mark making, reads a bit like a forgotten paper chain, a resilient one. Salt Action came about through a collaboration with artist Katie Garth's Unconscious. On January 13th, 2020, Katie sent me the following message. In my dream last night, we were at a show of your work alongside other contemporary artists. You had a pretzel-shaped fabric appendage on one of your paintings, which was itself a large piece of plywood standing up a few feet away from the wall, like a propped-up backdrop. There was a piece of printer paper on one side of it that was written on with a crayon, and when I asked you about it, you said, "Oh, that part was for Carol. I don't think she can make it today." You looked sad, so we took a nap on the floor, and the other visitors stepped over us to read the paper. One of them, an old white guy in a driving cap, said, "You can really tell how much she loves animals," as he was leaving. Later, Katie told me the piece was Cornflower Blue. A year prior, Katie and I visited Suzanne Bocanegra's show at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. The gallery was filled with Bocanegra's off-kilter kitsch costumes, and the rear half of the gallery was bisected by a series of flush, shoddy plywood walls, each painted white and covered in cloth, their bases mimicking stage sets. I had been thinking of building a large confrontational wooden sculpture that would perform similarly to the leaners. Katie's dream recalled Suzanne Bocanegra's sets. The pretzel element harkens back to my brief time as a farmer/baker in rural Austria, the cornflower blue to my great-grandmother's dress. Perhaps the core of the piece is Maggie Nelson's Bleuets, named for Joan Mitchell's Les Bleuets, French for cornflower. Bleuets has served me as a companion, catalyst, and a kind of antidote all at once. Like Nelson's narrator, I could very well ingest color and let it course through me. Like Nelson's narrator, I have known loss and longing, as we all do, and I have sought to mediate and distance myself from both. And like Nelson's narrator, I have succeeded in neither. Lydia Davis wrote of her friendship with Joan Mitchell and her own affinity for the painting in an essay of the same title, concluding, "Even now, just by remaining so mysteriously fixed in my memory, the painting poses a question that, once again, remains even after I have attempted to answer it, and that is, not how does the painting work, but how does the memory of the painting work?" Perhaps it's this very relationship of mystery and memory and interpretation that keeps me engaged in the process, moving forward with radical hope that the thing I'm making will reveal something to me, like an old friend's dream. A cornflower blue, vaguely anthropomorphic form, Salt Action stands nearly 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide. Built from puzzled plywood, the work sits on 3 swivel casters, 2 beneath the form, 1 beneath its rear leg. A tangerine racing stripe delineates its edge. A pretzel half hangs, half soars from its peak. The object's backside performs as a kind of backstage, revealing steel supports, exposed plywood, angle brackets, but it's built to move. I have a fantasy of gliding the piece across the gallery, right leg arabesqued, pretzel flapping. But the real crux of all of this is that Salt Action doesn't exist and won't exist for some time. Because just as I was going to cut the wood and bring it into being, with the help of several experts, the pandemic struck. One morning, while planning Salt Action, I used an overhead projector to cast my model onto the wall of an empty room. I adjusted it for scale, determined it should be 8 by 12 feet, the size of its shadow. While it may not exist, I know its shadow. And so I will end here with the work yet to be made, because the use in making is to uncover questions, because the use in making is to choose hope. Thank you.